Where to, buddy?
The Baxter Building. Quickly.
Hey, you're that Iron Man guy, ain't you?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes is one of the less talked about Marvel shows from the 2000s. It may not have garnered a fanbase as big as other similar series from its time like X-Men Evolution or Spectacular Spider-Man, but for the most part, it's still fondly remembered by those who managed to watch it during the brief time it aired on TV. This series stands as one of the best adaptations of the Fantastic Four outside the comics. It carefully selected elements from many different stories throughout their comic book history and condensed them into a new, fresh take that stays true to their characters' world and their core family values. Despite this show being legitimately good, it was still very short-lived, with it originally airing on Cartoon Network from 2006 to 2007 under a very erratic and constantly changing schedule, ultimately contributing to the show not being renewed for a second season. But much like with many other cancelled TV shows, thanks to interviews with the show's crew, we do have some information about what we would have seen had it continued. So let's explore this often overlooked Marvel show and what could have honestly been the most complete Fantastic Four adaptation had it gotten a chance to keep going. In 2004, Marvel Studios announced that they were working with French animation studio Moonscoop to produce an animated series based on the Fantastic Four, with Marvel having the domestic TV and DVD rights, while Moonscoop handled its international distribution, as well as handling the actual production of the series with creative insight from Marvel. Moonscoop are mostly remembered for creating Code Lyoko, another memorable action cartoon from the 2000s. Development itself on the series was overseen by Craig Kyle, a producer and Marvel executive that has worked on many Marvel animated shows, and he also brought on board Christopher Yost to serve as the story editor and head writer, being responsible for writing most episodes of the series. Yost is famously associated with the Yostverse, a shared animated universe of Marvel shows and movies which were worked on by Yost, with them having many connections between them. This Fantastic Four series isn't usually included in the Yostverse, but it is one of the first Marvel shows that Yost ever worked on. This series, much like other comic book adaptations, aimed to incorporate many different aspects from throughout the Fantastic Four's expansive comic book lore and focus on their most essential core elements, distilling them down into a version of the FF that felt true to the spirit of their source material. In some DVD extras included for the series' home release, they broke down the influences they had while working on its early development, specifically citing some classic comic book runs that defined who the Fantastic Four truly are, such as the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby run from the 1960s, the Marv Wolfman run from the late 70s and early 80s, and also the early 2000s run written by Mark Waid and illustrated by Mike Wieringo, which was notable for fleshing out and giving depth to Reed Richards' character in a way that hadn't been done before, and giving him a more compelling interpretation that served as a basis for the show's more relatable version of Richards. Visually, it has a great and pretty unique art style. I personally like its aesthetic, the character designs, and all their different looks. Although, if I'm being honest, its animation can be a bit underwhelming and somewhat limited, and while I respect their use of CGI for the time, it does date the show and hasn't aged too well. Other contemporary shows like The Brave and the Bold were able to mix traditional hand-drawn animation with CGI in a much better way, in part probably because The Brave and the Bold had a cel-shaded look to their CG assets that made them blend in better with their traditional animation. The art style really is great though, and one of the series' biggest positives. Another fun fact about the show's designs that was shared on its DVD extras is that Moonscoop actually wanted to give Sue Storm pink hair, but Marvel rejected this idea and they used her traditional blonde look instead.
We even tried something very funny, is we tried also to give pink hair to Susan, and Marvel said no, Susan is American, so she needs to be blonde.
Throughout its 26-episode run, this show got to adapt most of the Fantastic Four's classic rogues and settings like the Negative Zone, and they got to use the Skrulls, the Kree, Ronan the Accuser, Mole Man, Impossible Man, Annihilus, Namor, and a lot more characters. Even though this show isn't usually considered to be a part of the Yostverse shared continuity, it still managed to expand on its iteration of the Marvel Universe by including a multitude of different guest heroes, such as Iron Man, Ant-Man, the Hulk, She-Hulk, and even Squirrel Girl. Peter Parker also showed up, but not as Spider-Man. He was just working as a freelance photographer, hired by Johnny Storm to help them improve the FF's reputation after the Frightful Four were making them hated in the public eye. Also, while the X-Men never showed up, Johnny did mention Quicksilver during the series, confirming that the mutant characters do exist. So had the show continued, we probably would have seen them actually appear.
Stoneface too slow.
Not exactly Quicksilver yourself, big guy.
Despite all these guest appearances, there's also a number of characters who you'd think would have shown up for sure, but they just never did. I always found it odd that Black Panther never appeared on the show, given that he's closely associated with the FF in the comics, and he even debuted in their original run. One of Black Panther's biggest enemies, Claw, did actually appear on the show as a part of the Frightful Four, since he does have a history as a member of the team in the comics. Two other characters that really surprised me that they never showed up were the Silver Surfer and Galactus. And during an old interview that Marvel Animation Age had with Christopher Yost, we did get some details on this. Yost said that Galactus couldn't be used because the network's mandate was that the show be mostly comedic, without that many serious or dramatic elements to it. And since there really isn't anything funny about a giant cosmic entity consuming an entire planet and killing everything, they ended up using Terminus instead for the series' final episode. It's also been rumored that Galactus and Silver Surfer were off limits for the show, since Fox were already planning to use them in the upcoming Rise of the Silver Surfer live-action movie. And back then, both Marvel and DC usually had stipulations in place for their TV shows that didn't allow them to use specific characters that they were planning to use for live-action movies, something I always found to be really dumb and creatively limiting. This show doesn't have the same dramatic weight or inclination to explore deeper and more mature themes as other superhero animated series, but it still did a good job in using its lighthearted and comedic tone to do some really fun episodes. One of my favorites was Bait and Switch, which had the Fantastic Four all switching powers with each other, and them screwing up because they don't know how they work. It's a simple but really fun, straightforward story. The Cure is also one of the best episodes of the show. The story has a nice emotional core with Ben Grimm learning to value his worth both as a hero and as a person, finally viewing himself as more than just a monster, and it was also really cool to see She-Hulk. So despite it being mostly comedic and not trying to focus on any complex storytelling, there were some ongoing plot lines that developed throughout the series, like Reed working on a cure for Ben, or the Skrulls' ongoing feud with the Fantastic Four. Speaking of the Skrulls, during his interview with Marvel Animation Age, Yost also said that if the show was greenlit for a season 2, they wanted to explore the Kree-Skrull War, a conflict that was even hinted at during an episode.
Foolish, impulsive, dangerously powerful, but not an enemy. These creatures may yet be useful against the Skrulls.
Skrulls?
They also wanted to use the Inhumans, Magic Doom, have more guest heroes, and a way to do Galactus and the Silver Surfer. And when he was asked about the many guest heroes that they did get to use on the series, Yost said that if given the chance, he'd like to do spin-offs of Ant-Man and the Elders of the Universe. There are also other characters that we can assume could have eventually appeared on the show, like Nova for example, given that Frankie Ray had already appeared on an episode where she and Johnny Storm got trapped inside the negative zone. Yost also spoke on other limitations that they had for the series, saying that they weren't allowed to explore any larger overarching story arc or have an emphasis on continuity because the network wanted it to be self-contained and episodic, something that limited the show in my opinion. I believe it would have been more engaging if they could have explored larger storylines and get into more complex themes, but that just wasn't what the network executives wanted. Another thing about the series is that there wasn't much focus on any romantic relationship between Reed Richards and Sue Storm because they wanted to mostly focus on the Fantastic Four as a team of young heroes and didn't want to age up the cast, and presenting an already married Reed and Sue would have aged the characters too much. They only briefly considered the idea so they could get to eventually adapt Franklin Richards, but they had already decided they wanted to have a younger version of the Fantastic Four. Throughout its episodes, they still included some moments that hinted at their growing feelings for each other.
Did I ever tell you you're amazing?
No, but go on.
Okay.
Ultimately, the show only ended up lasting for one season comprised of 26 episodes, aired from 2006 to 2007. No official statement has ever been released on its cancellation, but during my research, I read what fans were posting on the Anime Superhero Forum back in 2007 while the show was still airing, since it gives us an idea as to the show's reception and performance on TV. Unfortunately though, when the show originally aired, Cartoon Network moved its time slot multiple times as it was premiering episodes, something that's usually done by TV channels when a new program isn't getting very good ratings, with CN not even airing all of the episodes that were already produced. Considering this, it's very likely that the show underperformed and couldn't get a big enough audience for it to continue, which would honestly make sense since the show always seemed to be like one of the most overlooked superhero cartoons of its time and wasn't talked about as much as other Marvel and DC shows. Another possible reason for its cancellation would be low merchandising sales, like other similarly short-lived action cartoons that heavily relied on toy sales. In an old 2007 interview, Craig Kyle said that Toy Biz was the company that produced the show's toy line and it was also meant to handle its distribution. But in the end, Hasbro acquired the toy license and distribution rights for the show's merchandising. And whenever a cartoon has low ratings, it's fair to assume it also had low toy sales. So all of this most likely played a part in the show not getting renewed. It's truly a shame when a show ends up being cancelled due to an erratic programming schedule and mismanagement from its broadcasting company, since it feels like the show was never given an honest chance to find an audience and succeed. However, even considering the unfortunate context that surrounded the series, Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes still stands as the most complete adaptation of these characters that we've seen so far. Personally, my favorite adaptation of the FF outside the comics was their iteration from Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I just love how each member was portrayed, and I feel like their characterization stayed true to how they are in the comics. And the same goes for EMH's version of Doctor Doom. But obviously, that wasn't a Fantastic Four show, it was an Avengers show. So as of me recording this video, World's Greatest Heroes is still one of, if not the most expansive FF adaptation we've seen. And had it gotten the chance to continue, I'm sure that the show would have kept improving and adapting even more elements from FF comics that fans wanted to see. And hopefully, with the team's upcoming introduction into the MCU, we might see Marvel finally giving their first family an adaptation that respects their mythology and are able to capture every side of them accurately, from being primarily cosmic explorers more so than superheroes, to showing them acting as the solid, closely knit family that they're meant to be. With all that being said, tell me, how do you feel about Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes? Would you have liked to see the show continue? And are you excited to see the FF debut in the MCU? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.